Welcome to Change It Up Radio. I am Paula Shaw, your host, and I am delighted to see you today because we have a really important show. The information that we are going to be discussing today is critical to the well-being of our children. So I'm glad you're here. Those of you who follow us on Change It Up Radio know that we're a show that's all about change. So we are either bringing you change makers who are trying to make the world a better place, or we're bringing you information to help you better cope with change so that you can cope with it in a more productive, positive way. So if you would like to get information about this show or check out being a guest or a sponsor of this show, please go to changeitupradio.com. That's changeitupradio.com. And if you would like more information about me or my work as an author, a speaker, a life transitions coach, and of course, host of this podcast and radio show, you can find that information on paulashaw.com. That's paulashaw.com. So, we need to talk about this important issue of the children being over-medicated. And I have to tell you that until my guest today came and spent some time with me discussing this very issue, I was not as aware as I should have been myself of what kind of statistics we were looking at, what the situation actually is in America with the over-medication of children. So let me throw a few statistics out to you just to give you an idea of the magnitude of the problem. In 2014, the Center for Disease Control reported that as many as 10,000 toddlers in America were receiving psychostimulant medication like Ritalin. Toddlers. So I can only guess that because children are going to school younger and younger now, that a lot of their natural energy and their need to want to run around and be active is being viewed as ADHD. And so these children are becoming medicated for what is really normal toddler experience. The National Center for Health reported that 7.5% of children between 6 and 17 are taking meds for emotional and or behavioral difficulties. Now that was in 2012. This is 8 years later. So you can bet that number is higher. And that number was a 5-fold increase from the statistics of 1988. And that same report said 1.3% of our children are on antidepressants. The children. Just a few more statistics. So 11% of children have a diagnosis of ADHD, and 1 in every 12 adolescents suffer from severe developmental, behavioral, or emotional disorders. That's kind of a huge number. And the biggest part of the problem is a lot of what these kids are experiencing is actually pretty normal, but people don't have time. They don't have time to sit with them. Their parents don't have time to talk with them, to work things out, to teach them coping skills. Their psychiatrists are only seeing them for maybe 15 minutes to check out the med dosage and see if it needs adjusting. Teachers have a lot to do, so they don't always have any time to process with these kids. And so the problems that they're experiencing don't get resolved. And a lot of what they're experiencing is the normal, natural stuff of being an adolescent. Now, I was really impressed with an article I read by Dr. Lawrence Kelmanson, who was a Cornell graduate, was a director of Craig House Hospital in New York, and says, the name of his article was, "To Make Adolescence Permanent, Label It Bipolar." And his article was saying, he made such good points. He said, adolescence is a stressful time. First of all, kids are starting to have their own thoughts. They're starting to realize maybe they don't agree with everything their parents believe. They're individuating, which is naturally stressful, both for parents and for kids. There's a lot of social pressure on them. Everybody wants to look like the popular kids, wants to dress the same. They all want to, be cool and be part of the group that's looked like as the in kids, the popular kids. Changing bodies and changing hormonal levels cause a lot of upheaval in the lives of adolescents. And moodiness and temper tantrums are going to result. We all know we can get moody and have a temper tantrum just from being hungry because the chemistry of the body is changed. Well, the same thing happens to kids when their hormones are changing. So I remember actually I was going through menopause at the same time my daughter was becoming an adolescent. And some of it was kind of humorous because we were having a lot of the same issues. She'd wake up really hot in the night and throw off her blankets, and so would I. But of course, we were at very different ends of the spectrum. So we've got all this stuff that goes on with adolescents naturally. It's a roller coaster ride. It's moodiness. They're up, they're down. It's tricky. But then in 1990, something happened that I think was not a good thing for our kids. The criteria in the DSM-4, or it might have been the DSM-3 at that time, was expanded. The criteria for bipolar disorder. They expanded the criteria to include a lot of things that are normal and natural for teenagers. The mood swings, and some of these other things that we've been discussing suddenly became symptoms of a disorder instead of just the turbulent teens. So these poor kids didn't get the same kind of treatment I got, where your parents sit down and they say to you, all right, what's going on? We got to figure this out. Let's give you some coping skills. Let's give you a chance to cry or process or whatever you need to do. No, instead, these kids got medicated. And by the way, remember how we were talking about how young children are starting to be medicated now? Well, those stimulants that calm the ADD child, as a child takes them over the years, by the time they get to adolescence, they can cause them to be more aggressive. They're not calming anymore. So we got a problem there because, as we've already looked at, lots of kids are medicated from the time they're toddlers for their supposed ADD. Now, sometimes I'm sure it really is something that needs to be worked with, but a lot of times it's just normal, natural energy, or it's a kid's way of burning off their anger or their frustration about problems in the home or in their own lives. And so these poor kids, they're getting labeled with a medical issue when they're really just normal kids who need some processing. They need therapy. See, part of the problem is we're over-medicating, but we're also under-treating. We're not giving them the therapy that they need, the time, the teaching them the coping skills that they need. And so what happens too often is, now that they're labeled bipolar, their parents look at them differently. Now behavior that they might have corrected or disciplined before, they're chalking up to, oh, the meds aren't working, or oh, the meds just, must not be kicking in the same way today. They're having a bad day. Instead of saying, we're going to have some boundaries here, this is not acceptable behavior. The way we would talk to children if they were just pushing the boundaries or behaving badly. And on the part of the kid, it's not a good thing either, because they either look at themselves as broken or somehow defective. Their self-esteem can plunge, their confidence can plunge, and it doesn't take them very long or very many experiences of seeing mom or dad go, oh, well, it's the medication. I don't want to be too hard on her. And pretty soon they learn to blame it on the medication too, or use that for an excuse. So what do we do, parents? What's a better way? Well, my guest today, whom we're calling Erin, she's going to be giving us some insights as to what it's like to be that teenage kid, to be that kid who's on the meds, who is possibly experiencing alteration of their entire life because of these meds. But what I really want to encourage parents, before you take your kids to the psychiatrist, sit down with them, talk with them, help them learn coping skills and boundaries, help them with the problems they're having, but don't do it for them. Give them the skills to be able to deal with stressful times, tough situations on their own, because then from that they grow and they will become more confident. If we don't do that, if we just give them the meds, those issues are still there. And if anything, they may be worsened or exacerbated because of the meds. So we will be giving you a lot more firsthand insight from our guest when we come back from this break. So please stay with us. We'll be right back. And you Facebook live stream viewers know that you're backstage with me. We're actually recording this show, and then it will be sent to the studio and produced with music and commercials and all of that stuff. But for right now, it's you and me and my guest who is about to come in. So hang with us. Welcome back to Change It Up Radio here with Paula Shaw. We're talking about something that is really important today, something I'm passionate about. And that conversation is about the over-medication of our children. In the last segment, I gave you some statistics about how young they're being medicated, how many of them are being medicated, and what are some of the pitfalls when that over-medication happens. But now I'm going to give you a view of what it's like to be that kid. We're going to hear from a very, very courageous young woman who came to me recently with the story of 16 years of her life that she feels she lost because of being over-medicated. At one point, being on 9 different meds. So please don't go anywhere, because right now I would like to introduce you to my guest. She is a young woman. We are calling her Erin. I can't give you a bio on her because we are protecting her confidentiality. So she will not be coming on camera, but you will be hearing her story and you will be hearing her voice, and it's riveting. Trust me, it really is riveting and eye-opening. So she is a young woman, like so many of your children, did well enough in school, but at the age of 14 was put on medication. And I think I'm not going to say anything more because I want her to be able to reveal her story. So Erin, would you please join us?
Hi, Paula.
Hi, thank you so much for having the courage to want to tell this story today, because I think that when they hear your story, there may be many, many kids who get spared the same experience you had. So let's go back to the beginning, Erin.
Mm-hmm.
What age were you when you were first medicated, and why were you medicated?
I was medicated for the first time when I was 14, and I was given Zoloft because I was sad. I had been hurting myself, and I hadn't been sleeping, and I had what I thought was depression.
Mhm.
And
When you say hurting yourself, what does that mean?
so when I was 14, I started to cut myself
Uh,
and burn myself.
ooh.
Um, and actually before that, when I was in 7th grade or 6th grade, was kind of battling eating disorders. So it was restricting food, and then it turned into bulimia, and it kind of was back and forth till I was about 29.
Oh my. And you know what makes me sad, Erin? I was fortunate enough to read a really wonderful article when my daughter was at that age, whose name is also Erin. Um, I read an article that said, do not make a big deal about your child's natural weight gain,
Mhm.
because kids around that age that you're describing are supposed to gain weight, which will eventually turn in, for girls, breasts and buttocks, and for boys, there's bigger size and muscle.
Mhm.
And yet so often parents freak out, the kids freak out because they want to look like the norms they see on social media and all that. And oftentimes we do create eating disorders at that time by encouraging our kids worry about what they're eating. So there's another part of your story that's an example of something that didn't have to be, but parents, we don't screw you guys up on purpose. We don't wake up in the morning and go, God, I got this great kid. What can I do wrong? We want to do it right. And that's one of the reasons why I so wanted to share your story today, because a lot of parents are doing what they think is right. So please go on. I'm sorry I interrupted.
Oh, no, absolutely. I completely agree with what you're saying. My parents have always acted just with the utmost love for me. Everything they did was out of love,
Mm-hmm.
um, including taking me to the psychiatrist. That was out of love and concern.
Mm-hmm.
And although they had differing opinions about medications, I arrived at that office when I was 15, or 14, I'm sorry, out of love. They took me there out of love.
Mm-hmm. And so what happened? How did you happen to get prescribed Zoloft? Did they feel that was the answer to your depression, your sadness?
Actually, so the Zoloft came, um, yes, and a short answer, yes. The Zoloft was the first med I was put on, and actually I was not put on that by a psychiatrist in the beginning. It was by a regular doctor.
That
Um,
happens often too. And a
yes,
lot of the regular doctors just don't have as much training in the effects of these drugs that affect your brain.
yes, that's absolutely true.
Mm-hmm.
And it was a very low dose, but anyway, when I was 15, my parents, they brought me to a psychiatrist after someone on my softball team told my coach that they had seen my arms that were just very, like, badly beaten up, and they expressed concern, and my coaches in turn told my parents what had been going on. And so that led me to the psychiatrist. And as you said earlier, I had I left after 15 minutes. I had a diagnosis of bipolar 2 disorder with hypomania.
Ooh.
um, And I left the office with a prescription for an antipsychotic, Seroquel, Lamictal, which is a mood stabilizer similar to lithium. Um, I left with a prescription for Lexapro and a medicine called naltrexone, which they give to people with, I believe it's an opioid addiction or some type of drug addiction. And that was with the thought being that it would curtail my impulse to hurt myself, to cut or burn myself.
Wow. So you were on 4 meds, 5 meds?
Yes, after 45 minutes, I had been placed on
Whoa.
4 different medications.
And you know, I mentioned an article I'd read by Dr. Kelmanson. One of the things he says is it takes several sessions to really accurately diagnose whether an adolescent is bipolar or whether these are just normal, natural experiences and what's the word I want? Manifestations, you know, of behavior from an adolescent. And you got all those meds diagnosed and prescribed for you after 15 minutes.
Yes, that's correct. He saw that I was sad and, you know, and I had said I had trouble sleeping, but I had never had a manic episode. Really, I mean, I had a lot of energy and I wasn't sleeping a lot. It could have been the Zoloft that I had been, that's very, activating.
Oh.
But I was up and down, and I was mostly down though. And so yes, I had a diagnosis, but more important, like what the bigger picture and what became problematic was, I not only had a label, but I had a new identity. Instead of saying you have bipolars, you are bipolar. And in adolescence, you are searching, like you said, for an identity. And one was handed to me, and I owned it. And I always kind of applied myself with anything I ever did. In school, I got straight A's. Softball, I was a decent player, and so I became mentally ill after that appointment. And
wow.
Yes,
so the label became your identity.
Yes. I was kind of searching for one at that point, as most people are. And I didn't have a stable group of friends. And so it almost was it befriended me. It became like the mental illness became my friend and my identity, and the doctors would soon fill the places that in a normal childhood that friends would fill. And the group therapies, they became my once a week friends. And so, yeah.
And how long did this go on, Erin? And what was the quality of your life like?
I started at 15 going to therapy. That started out once a week. Then they said you need to come twice a week. And then it was, you need to come twice a week plus go to group therapy. And that lasted until I was 30, so 15 years.
Oh my.
And
Erin, you know what? Let me stop you right there because we've got to go to a break.
Okay.
And I think that's a perfect spot to stop. And when we come back, we're going to talk about what was the rest? What was the rest like? And what was that time like leading up to your age 30? You know, were you functioning normally and happily on those meds? Let's talk about that when we come right back from this break. We'll be right back. Oops. All right. If you're ready, my dear, we'll bring it back.
Okay.
Welcome back to Change It Up Radio here with Paula Shaw. I am so glad that you're tuned into this show because it's maybe one of the most important shows I've ever done. We are talking about the over-medication of our children. And my guest today is a young woman who was first medicated at age 14, given Zoloft for depression, and the next year 4 other meds were added onto that after a 15-minute diagnosis. So we are calling her Erin, and we are right at the point in her story when I believe, Erin, you said you were turning 30, or was it, how old were you? Now you're down the road a little bit, you've been on these meds, and I think you told me that at one point you were on as many as 9 meds. Is that correct?
I'm trying to think. That sounds about right. 8 or 9 meds. So since I was 15, I had been on a combination of mood stabilizers, sometimes 2 at a time, multiple antidepressants at a time, multiple antipsychotics. When I turned 18, they added benzodiazepines to my
Oh,
medicine, my med cocktail, and I was on those for 12 years, which is about 11 and a half years longer than you ever should be on anything like that.
absolutely. And you know what? At this point, I want to say one thing, Erin. There are situations where temporary meds can maybe even save a kid's life. But temporary is the operative word here. We cannot let meds become a way of life. What was happening to Erin was they started her at 15, and here we're into her 20s. There's no temporary medication here. Instead, they're adding more and more meds. One didn't work exactly the way they thought, so maybe if we add this, it will tweak that and things will work better. Right, Erin? Isn't that pretty much the logic?
That is exactly what happened. And they never really tapered me off them when I was on them. And there was never talk about dealing and combating, like dealing with life without the meds. I always was told, you are sick, you are mentally ill, you will be on some form of these meds for the rest of your life. You will always be in therapy. You will always be sick. And,
Oh,
when you hear that multiple times a week for 15 years, like you believe it to your core.
mm.
And yeah, so everything you said is completely true. And I think the one very important thing is, just to know that with the talk about being on the meds and that they would help you, and that, if you were off of them, they would, you wouldn't be able to function. The meds never ever gave me what I was searching for, which was acceptance and love. And I wanted to have value as a human, and I wanted to learn to love myself. And all the meds did was make me numb. And it didn't change my situation, which is what needed to be changed. And all it did was it killed the very thing that made me a human, which was it killed my sympathy, it killed my empathy, and it made me, they did a lot of really horrible things, but I'm coming to realize that those were the 2 things that were taken away, and those were the 2 things that were of the most value, I think, that they took away.
And without sympathy and empathy, it's pretty hard to really feel love, isn't it?
I've realized I've never truly felt love or any emotion until I was able to get off of the meds about a year ago, a little over a year ago.
So for all those years, all those formative years, you were robbed of that opportunity because the meds, instead of really helping you have better quality of life, they just simply numbed the symptoms, correct?
Yes. Yes. I can distinctly remember the return of emotion and what that felt like when I had realized that I hadn't had an emotion in 15 years. And it had started as a sad emotion, remembering my grandfather, but it turned into, and I cried, and I realized I hadn't felt sadness or hadn't felt anything. And then the tears of sadness kind of became tears of joy, because I was like, oh my gosh, this is what it is to feel sadness. And
Yes.
it turned into elation. Like it was invigorating.
You were a human being who was alive again.
Yes. And that moment of my first tears, I realized I was alive, and it was incredible.
What about side effects while you were on all those meds, Erin? Were there side effects from having so many medications in your body?
There absolutely were. Some of the bigger side effects I had were I experienced 2 grand mal seizures.
Oh
Um,
my God.
and they were awful. And they, at the time, the doctors didn't know that they were from the meds. They did brain scans and said, oh, you might have a tumor, or you might have something else wrong with your brain. And so there was that. I had rage, which they attributed to my mental illness.
Mm.
It wasn't. I have yet to experience any sort of rage since being off the meds, but it was a violent rage.
Mhm.
And the depression and hallucinations, actually, what I ended up realizing is that I had I had heart palpitations, and my heart started beating, like, had an arrhythmia for a while. And actually, I ended up realizing the meds were the cause of most of my problems because of the heart arrhythmia. Yes, as bringing back to side effects, depression, hallucinations, and I'm trying to think, anxiety turned out to be a side effect. But these were all things that I ended up being treated for, and they ended up making up my diagnoses.
So they
Um,
were actually causing the problem they were treating you for ultimately.
Yes. So that's actually a huge part of my story is I did not start hallucinating until I had been on Seroquel, and the meds I had started on at 15. So let's see, I started hallucinating at about 6 months, or 4 to 6 months after I started the meds.
Oh.
And my doctor told me that that was my mental illness progressing. And he said, well, that we need to up the meds. And so that became the story of the past 15 years, was that everything just got worse and worse as they increased these meds. And it didn't get better until I got off of them.
So let's talk a little bit about what was the turning point. How did you finally get off of them?
The turning point. So when the turning point was, I had many suicide attempts, and some of them had ended up in the hospital, and like I'd ended up hospitalized. And the turning point was, let's see, when I turned 29, I had just decided I was done. I was done being alive. It wasn't the first time I had decided that, but I had every intention of, I actually told my doctor, I said, I will not live to be 31. I'm going to kill myself by my 30th birthday. Mark my words. And I just looked back at my life, and I had been medicated for 15 years to gain a significant amount of weight, to become depressed, be crippled by terrifying hallucinations, auditory, visual, and olfactory. Had multiple seizures. I had electroconvulsive therapy. I had, I believe, 12 rounds of that, which robbed me of my memory for a good amount of time. I had a service dog. I had many interventions. I had many diagnoses, and I just saw myself as a sick person, and I wanted no part in the life I was leading. It was
Yes.
not a life.
No, it looked like there was no hope to you, I'm sure.
Absolutely. And so I decided at 29 to just call quits, and I began writing letters, and just planning everything out. I got rid of all of my friends over a period of about 6 months. I just abruptly ended most of my relationships.
Mm-hmm.
And I was preparing to die at 29. And on
And
my, I'm sorry.
I'm sorry, I was just going to say, and the story
Mm-hmm.
of what happened on that 29th, the eve of that birthday,
Yes.
is a very, very important part of your story. And so I would like us to come back to that right after this break. And I really want to urge all my listeners to stay with us, because we're about to hear something that you've probably never heard before that saved this woman's life. So please stay with us, and we will be right back with Erin. All right, Erin, if you're ready, let's just keep going.
Okay.
All right. Welcome back to Change It Up Radio, here with Paula Shaw. We are talking tonight about, are we over medicating our children? And my guest is a woman who at the age of 14 was put on medications that the list just kept growing throughout her 20s, to the point where she gained 96 pounds. She was hallucinating. She was more depressed. She was having convulsions, seizures, and saw no friends, no hope, no joy, saw no reason to keep on going. And we are at the point in her story right now where she is on the weekend before her 30th birthday, and she had very calmly vowed that that would be the day that she was done, because her life had become such a nightmare. So Erin, please take us back there, and what happened on that day?
I will. That is so this is the part of the story. It's actually one of the best parts is well, it's getting to the best part, I guess. But so the weekend of my 29th birthday, I had seen my psychiatrist on a Friday, and he said, I had told him, I hadn't said, exactly what I had planned on doing, but I did say, my friends had wanted to take me to Disneyland for the weekend.
Mm.
And he said, you either, and I had expressed that I did not want to go because I had plans, and my plans that I was telling myself was that I was going to kill myself that weekend. And they certainly clashed with going to Disneyland. So he said,
Definitely two ends of the spectrum, huh?
definitely two ends of the spectrum. And he said, you either go to Disneyland for the weekend or you spend the weekend at a psychiatric hospital that I had been frequenting since I was 15.
Mm.
And
So that was a no-brainer choice. Off you went to Disneyland.
it was a no-brainer. So I went to Disneyland with my two friends, and we had a lovely time. It kind of, so at one point I found myself sitting outside the gates, and for some reason I was alone, and I heard the sound of laughter, and I had been followed around Disneyland by one of my hallucinations all day, which at the time was, he laughed a lot. And so when I heard this laughter, I kind of got upset. I thought I was hearing things, and I looked up, and I saw this little girl running across the courtyard, or the front entrance of Disneyland. And I saw that, and then her mother just came running after her and just kind of scooped her up and swung her around, and they both fell over and just were laughing, and it was just a beautiful interaction.
Mm.
And it struck me, and not that I had never seen an interaction between, a mother and a child, but I just think like the combination of like the finality of my decision that I was going to kill myself on Monday, and just the combination of looking at something so beautiful, it just gave me a minute to pause. And I saw their happiness, and I wanted it. And so actually at that moment, I just said, what would it take to be like them? I didn't have the ability to think abstractly about it at the time. But so I saw that, and I said, I need to become a mom. And so I just kind of thought about it for just a few minutes, and I just said, well, what if you're I looked at myself and I just kind of was like, I was very overweight and I was covered in, I had started scratching my face. And so my face was all cut up and scarred and my body was covered in scars. And I said, like, I don't think you'll ever be able to date anyone. But I said, what about doing in vitro fertilization? Because then you could just do it on your own.
Mm-hmm.
So I said, I kind of marinated on that for the rest of the weekend. And then on, I believe it was like Wednesday of that week, I went to my doctor and I said, I'm going to try it. I'm not going to kill myself, but I'm going to try and do IVF. And
In vitro fertilization, huh?
in vitro fertilization.
All right. So what happened?
So just like I pursued anything I wanted, like in my life, I pursued this with like everything I had. And I, met with the doctors and everyone was supportive of it because they saw it as me clinging to life for the first time ever.
Uh-huh.
And so I started pursuing it. And the first step was, they looked at my meds and they said, well, you can't be on any of these. You need to get off all of them now.
Thank God.
Yes.
What was that like? I mean, that had been your whole life since 14. So what was it like getting off those meds?
The
And
withdrawal
how did you do it?
Well, so it was tricky. I was on huge doses of everything. Everything I was on, I was maxed out at.
Wow.
It was extreme. They were extremely high dosages.
And you did this, of course, under the supervision of a psychiatrist, we want to say.
Absolutely. My psychiatrist supervised the whole time. The trouble is that people go to school for years to tell you how to get on the meds, and nobody goes to tell you how to get off.
Yes.
So we winged it. We set up a taper schedule.
Uh-huh.
And it was over the course of 6 months, I got off of, I was taking Seroquel, propranolol, which they gave me to treat multiple personalities, lithium, clonazepam, diazepamine, which is another kind of an older antidepressant,
Mm-hmm.
and I believe it was Effexor, which is an antidepressant. And I might be missing one, but so it took 6 months. And this is my favorite part of the story because we started with Seroquel, and I was terrified to come off of it because the doctors were saying, well, we might lose you, you might hallucinate and everything might get worse.
Yeah.
And after the first month, nothing got worse. And I realized that after taking the last dose, I actually stopped hallucinating completely.
Oh, and that was when you realized that it was that medication that was causing the hallucinations in the first place.
Yeah. So it took a couple months to really make that, connection, like to really make it, because we were waiting for them to come back. But
yes.
But my God, I hadn't had relief from the hallucinations since I was 15. And at 30, I wasn't tormented all the time. It was incredible.
You know what, Erin? I wish we had tons more time, but we're down to our last few minutes. So Tell us a little bit about what is life like for you now? You are off all meds, right?
I'm off of everything. And so as I came off each med, I lost a symptom. They all turned out to be side effects.
Wow.
And life is incredible now. I'm not living the dream, but I'm living my dream. And I can feel emotions. I can feel my body again, which I hadn't been able to. And it's just been incredible. I'm going back to school to get a master's degree. And it's just been it's been a whirlwind year, and it's what a pleasure. The moments of absolute sadness have been just as much of a joy as the moments of happiness, because I can feel again.
Yeah, you're alive again. And
Mhm.
I knew you through this whole process. So I have to say, the day that you came here, when the first time I'd seen you since you were off meds, I cried, right? I just cried because there you were, alive and vibrant and beautiful, and in your life for the first time since I'd known you. It was so beautiful, so
Thank
beautiful.
you.
And it makes me really happy to know you're feeling that too.
Yes. Oh my gosh. Yes. It was so good to see you, and it's um, really every day. I wake up every morning and I'm overwhelmed with gratitude, because so many people who have been on a similar road as I have been on, they never come out of it.
No, that's so
And
true.
yeah.
So in this last few seconds here, Erin, what would you like to say to people, or what do you want them to know?
I think that really the takeaway message I'd like people to know is just give your kids a chance to be kids. And I know that adolescence can be scary. And my God, if a child had come to me with their arms cut up and wanting to die, and someone said there was a med for that, I could see how that would be appealing. But the meds do not change your situation. They won't change how you look. They won't make you popular. They won't change how your family is or your interactions with them. They won't teach you social skills. They will not do any of that, but they will rob you of your feelings so that that stuff doesn't bother you anymore, and you will become a maladjusted person
Mm,
who is unable to cope. And if someone hears this, just one person, and they give their kid a chance and maybe look at taking a different path, and just realizing they need to bring their kid needs to feel valued in some way and safe, and really shake things up if they're struggling like I did, then this is worth it.
oh, honey, I cannot thank you enough. Hope I can get through this part. I can't thank you enough for what you've shared today, what you've given my listeners, and what you've given everyone that ever encounters this show. It will live on the podcast platforms. As all of you know, we're on AM 1170 and 96.1 on Sunday nights, at 96.1 FM on Sunday nights at 9 o'clock. But this show will be on every major podcast platform. Please share it. Please share it with everybody you know, so that this beautiful effort that Erin has made today to share her story can help someone that you know, or someone that someone you love knows. Thank you for being with us today, Erin. Ah, my heart is just so full with gratitude. Thank you, thank you, thank you for this beautiful story you shared with us. And we will see you all next week. So until then, take care of yourself, and bye-bye. Stay safe. Stay safe. Bless you, Erin.
Thank you.
Mm, bye-bye.